When I started homeschooling, one of the subjects I was most terrified about was science. It's not something I should have been terrified about. And honestly, when I very first started, I didn't want to screw my kids up. And so I bought a myriad of curricula only to get rid of it after a couple of years because we didn't need it or use it. I want to talk about 12 ways that we can teach and experiment and experience science that don't involve buying a specific curriculum. My name is Janae Daniels. I'm a wife, a mother of 6, and a former middle school teacher turned homeschool mom, independent researcher, and homeschooling mentor. Welcome to the School to Homeschool podcast. When we started homeschooling, my 2 oldest homeschooling children were about to go into high school, and I was really concerned about the science aspect. And even after one full year of deschooling, the second year and the third year, I would still panic and go, oh, we've got to do some science curriculum. And inevitably, we'd start a curriculum, of which I had purchased more than I ever should have. And we'd end up stopping it. It was boring, and yet nothing seemed to stick. And so by the end of the second or third year, I ended up getting rid of almost all of them. And I remembered that a good friend of mine, when I very first started homeschooling, and I was really concerned, particularly about science. That was the big subject for me that I was struggling with, and asked me an important question. She said, Janae, I want you to tell me the top 5 things you remember from chemistry in high school. And I could not remember anything. And then she said, what about biology? And I'm like, oh, I remember we dissected a starfish. And she's like, okay. And a squid. And she was like, okay, what else? And I said, I don't remember anything. She was like, right. You don't remember. It never went into long-term memory. I would not be as concerned. If it were me, I wouldn't be as concerned about making sure that you cram all this curriculum down their throats, because they're not going to remember any of it, just like you don't. And you were in a school learning for 4 years, right? And yet you remember next to nothing about it, which made me pause and think. So I got rid of most of the curriculum. Now, the only curriculum that I kept is by The Good and the Beautiful, and it's called Maturation and Sexual Reproduction. This is one that I was like, okay, definitely don't want to get this wrong, especially when, menstruation comes up and we have to talk about, things. So that is one curriculum that I did keep. But I started discovering that there are far better ways to approach science than curriculum. I got a call a couple of weeks ago from my son's, one of his best friends who went to public school. And he would come over all the time. He is this summer working in a lab. He's studying chemistry or physics, I can't remember which one. And he got an internship in a lab, and he called me a couple of weeks ago and he said, hey, do you remember when I was in high school, I would always argue about how important science classes were because you didn't do them. I have learned so much more in the last 6 weeks in my internship that I'm doing in an actual science lab than I learned in all of my science classes in high school, all of my science classes this last year of college. I said, why do you suppose that is? And he said, because I see it in real life. I see how it's integrated in real life. That's something that I am continuously reminded of, is that subjects in real life are not siloed. You go outside and you see in the natural world, and you see mathematics and you see geometry all over the natural world. So it's important to understand that some of the best ways to approach science are integrated ways. So the first idea for you is coming up with unit studies. Now, what is a unit study? A unit study is where you pick a topic and then you learn all sorts of things around that. You might learn history around that thing. You might learn some of the mathematics behind that thing. For example, a child might be very interested in the American Revolution. And so as you're studying the American Revolution, you study some of the scientific discoveries that were happening at that time, or you study what was going on, when people would get hurt. How were they healed? Like, what did the doctors do? You might study what they ate and how they cooked. You might also study the historic clothing. At the same time, you might be studying all these different areas that encompass multiple subjects, including science. And then, which is a fabulous way to learn because it helps our brains and our children's brains make all sorts of connections to the real world. The second thing you could do is a thing called nature journaling. Now, I didn't learn about this until I started homeschooling. It's very common in the homeschooling world, especially for those who follow the Charlotte Mason philosophy. But nature journaling, and I actually did a couple of podcast episodes on this last year with John Muir Laws, which are fabulous to watch. He is brilliant to listen to as he describes how to nature journal. So nature journaling is literally going into nature, choosing an object, then drawing that object, whether it's a twig or a branch or a bug or a bird or a rock or a seashell or whatever. And you look at the measurements and you notice the details and you write the details, and you might write down things that it makes you think of. In the podcast interview that I did with John Muir Laws, he demonstrates how to nature journal, and I'll link it in the description. You are slowing down, or your child is slowing down to observe very carefully something in nature and putting it in a little notebook. It's essentially a little science art book. And it's brilliant and it's beautiful. Okay, the third thing that you can do is go on field trips with your kids. Now, let me share with you some of the field trip ideas for you and some of the things that we've done. You can go to the zoo and study the animals. And oftentimes at the zoo, they'll have classes. I've taken my kids to the aquarium, and they actually have these really cool homeschool classes where they'll teach the dissecting of squid, or they'll teach about sharks or different things. You can go to a space center. You can go to museums of nature and science. You can go to planetariums. I was visiting family, and then we were driving through Utah, decided to take a detour to this dig that's going on and has all these fossils. We've gone on hikes where we've toured caves, things like that. You can go to a water treatment. We did this a couple years ago. We went to a water treatment facility for the utilities company, and they shared all sorts of things with the kids. They gave us a tour. We got to watch the water be purified. It was disgusting. It smelled terrible. But it was a wake up for my kids. And we also learned about all of the legalities with water rights. And so we have, again, those integrated subjects. And it was fabulous. We've gone to a sourdough bakery, and the owner was ecstatic to have us come in and learn. And now my 14-year-old made his own starter and makes sourdough as well as sells sourdough. So it's brought in economics. That little science lesson inspired him to make sourdough and then sell sourdough. You could go. Yesterday, I took my kids to a friend of ours to their farm, and we got to help give the baby newborn pigs their shots. They're 4 days old, and they were adorable. And the farmer taught my kids how to distinguish between the male and the female pigs. And we also got to scoop out one of the chicken coops, because they do raise chickens and they sell them, and they raise pigs and they sell them. And so then we got to watch the eggs that are being incubated, and the turkey eggs that were being incubated. And we cleaned out the chicken coop. Then we had to learn how to transfer the chickens and teach them how to drink the water out of the right place. And it was a whole thing. And we collected eggs. We learned to look inside the egg to see using a flashlight. We learned all these cool things at the farm. They learned husbandry skills. And next Wednesday, we are going to watch them butcher chickens. And my 10-year-old said, "I'm afraid that will traumatize me for the rest of my life." And I said, "Well, too bad, so sad. This is part of husbandry. This is part of where our food comes from, and you need to see it." Field trips are a very hands-on, tangible way to learn about science. Okay, the fourth thing you can do is YouTube University. Mark Rober, right? If you haven't seen that YouTube channel, I guarantee your kids have, did a squirrel obstacle course, which totally turned one of my kids onto science and engineering. One of my kids had questions about genetics, watched some YouTube videos about genetics, totally clearly understood genetics. The funny thing is, in one of the comments in one of the genetics videos, the person wrote, I learned more in this 10, 15 minute video than I learned in my entire semester this last year in College of Genetics. Now, is that true or not? I don't know. But I thought that was interesting. But there's been different experiments and things that my kids have come upon while watching YouTube. And the next thing I know, they're trying it out in the kitchen. And so YouTube can be a really valuable source for science. Yes, we do have to use it responsibly and may have to monitor our kids on it, but it's a great resource to learn scientific principles. Number 5, documentaries. Y'all, Netflix and Amazon Prime and Wondrium and all of these different channels have some fabulous science documentaries. A lot of them are nature-based, right? You get the National Geographic documentaries. Even Disney, which I'm not a big Disney fan, but even Disney has some really great documentaries. And documentaries can be a great way to introduce topics and subjects to our children and engage them in a different way. I remember a documentary came out a few years ago called My Octopus Teacher. Y'all, I have watched that documentary like 3 times and have cried. And the way that it was, as he talks about this octopus and the things that he learned in real life, swimming and learning from this octopus. So documentaries can be a very, very valuable way to teach or introduce scientific principles to our kids. Number 6 is books. Just plain old books. You don't even have to own the books. You can go to the library and check out the most fabulous books all about science. You can get everything from bugs to chemistry to experiments to do in the kitchen. Books are a fabulous way to teach scientific principles without teaching a specific curriculum. Just searching through the books just because it's interesting to search through the books. Here's some that I've picked up over the years. A super simple biology book, just as a little reference book. Super simple physics, right? This one is the Elements Trilogy, Molecules, the Elements, and Reactions. I also have vintage books. This is The Household Physician. It's a homeopathic book for homeopathic treatment of diseases. This is from 1905. Yeah, I know that the Big Pharma would love this book. I'm sure they'd love to see that burned. But there's an astronomy book. These are some of my vintage textbooks that I have. Actually, they're not textbooks. They're just books on the subject that are fascinating. This one is Conversations in Chemistry. This one is a physics book. This is The Sciences and Art. They combine those. This is one of my favorites, Elements of Natural Philosophy. I also have one, a botany book. And it's so beautiful to look at the pictures. I also have this geography book, and it's physical geography, so it shows the currents of the waves, currents of the oceans, etc. So books can become a really valuable resource. When you look at children's books, there's all sorts of fabulous children's picture books all about science and butterflies and nature and bees. And it's a great way to talk about science by using and reading the books. Number 7 is science kits. Everything from, you can find all sorts of interesting kits like at Hobby Lobby, at Walmart, and then there's online ones that you can get that are subscriptions. This one is natural candle making kit. It's all about how to make natural candles. This one my daughter got as a gift. It's a signature spa set, and you learn how to make your own fragrances, etc. Volcano sets and grow your own rock candy. There's Crunch Labs by Mark Rober. They do a subscription set. It's a little expensive, but they're really cool, where you get the Crunch Lab box and the child gets the box each month in the mail, and it's to build something interesting, and they have a QR code that you scan, and it has Mark Rober teaching about this science principle, and then he builds with the child their thing and then discusses that science principle in real time as they're building the thing. Fabulous thing. Kiwi Crates does it as well. There's a few different science kit subscriptions that you can get. But that's another great way to introduce science, and kids love those things. Now, y'all, I'm not affiliated with these companies, but I have used them, and I know that they have been fabulous in introducing science and ideas and engineering and all these cool things to my kids. Number 8 is bring in experts. What do I mean by that? Well, I went to the farmer's market a few years back, and there was a lady that was selling homemade soaps, as every farmer's market has at least 5 of those. I asked this lady, could I pay you to come and teach our little co-op for homeschooling how to make soap? And she was delighted to come and teach us how to make soap. I've talked to other places people I found from the farmer's market, one that was doing aquaponics and how do you raise plants in this aquaponics way. And that actually ended up being a field trip, right? Which I find a lot of field trips through the farmer's market. I just ask around. I'm like, oh, and I talked to somebody who teaches ice cream. Again, this is going back to field trips, but they're like, oh, I could totally, we make ice cream professionally for all these stores that sell it. I would love to have you come and watch the ice cream making process, right? So we're going to be doing that a little bit later. They're in their busy season right now. That just happened. Bringing in experts or going to experts. I have a friend whose husband was getting his doctorate in something in the sciences. Anyway, he came and demonstrated all of this stuff with our co-op. He taught about molecules. He talked about nitrogen. He made nitrogen ice cream. And the whole thing lasted probably hour and a half. The kids were totally engaged as he came in and talked to us about all of these cool principles, and he geared them to the children and the teens, and they all loved them. Even the teenagers were like, that was really cool. People love to share the things that they do. Bring in experts and let the experts teach you. I even had a lady I met at the farmer's market, and she's an expert in all things birds. And she came and brought a bunch of her birds to a co-op that we had. And it was really cool. The kids learned all about birds and got to hold all these different kinds of birds. So bringing in experts is number 8. Number 9 is an obvious one. It is spend time in nature. A lot of time in nature. Go to the beach, go to the mountains, go to the streams. By the way, children and teens and people love moving water. Go to streams and rivers and lakes and spend time in the natural world. Allow kids to climb trees, observe nature in its majesty. Spend time in it, because naturally questions come up when we are out in the natural world, when we spend time in nature. All we have to do is look and observe. And kids come up with questions after a while. Listen for those questions, especially when they're little kids. Listen for those questions and don't dismiss the questions. Talk about it. Let's talk about this thing. Why is that tree growing those little things? I don't know. We should probably go look that up. I wonder if the tree is diseased. Why is that ant able to carry a little piece of cheese over its head that's 10 times bigger than its body? That's a good question. We should go look that up. We should use the natural world as a springboard into learning and growth, because that's what it does. Number 10, you can do co-ops, enrichment programs, summer camps, or if necessary, outsource the classes if you're really concerned about science, especially in high school. I'll be honest, I never really worried about science for my high school kids, but then again, I completely approached high school differently, and it makes some people want to have a heart attack, which I don't really care. But co-ops, enrichment programs, there are my kids have taken survival classes where they learned all about fire building and how fires work and water purification and fishing. That was a really cool class that they took. It was once a week for a series of a few months. There's iron working, when kids go and do welding or iron working. Even though they're working with their hands, y'all, they have to know and understand and learn scientific principles with heat and metals and how they work and metallurgy and all of that good stuff. Plumbing, any sort of construction classes or construction experiences all involve scientific principles, right? Whether you're looking at going into the trades and looking into becoming an electrician or a plumber. All of it uses scientific principles, and those co-ops naturally teach those principles or those classes or those enrichment programs. And yes, they are out there. Sometimes you have to look, and they're not necessarily in every city, but they're out there. We have an enrichment program in my state that teaches aeronautical engineering, and they take the kids, they have the kids build their own drones. They have the kids go up in gliders and in prop planes and in helicopters. They teach them how aeronautical engineering works, how the physics of all of it. And my son, who's now 14, who's been doing this for the last 2 or 3 years, can explain principles of flight beautifully, because not only did they talk about it in his class, but they also went up in the glider and they went up in the helicopter and they saw it in real time. I have a daughter who went to a forest school. The forest school was run by a lady who has 2 master's degree, one in applied mathematics and one in physics. And so she creates the coolest science lessons for these kids. And then they spend a good chunk of time out in the natural world because it is a forest school. But the lessons that she came up with, like my daughter came home and she's like, I built this model of the eye and I learned all about the eye and it was so cool, Mom. I learned all of these beautiful, cool things. And that's not something that I would naturally have thought to teach her. And then we went to the eye doctor and my daughter gabbed the eye doctor's ear off, which the eye doctor loved. And they gabbed all about the eye because it's something that she had learned in her enrichment program. So if you are really concerned, you're like, I don't want to have to try to teach this, you can outsource it. You can outsource it in elementary, middle, or high school. Again, I did something totally radical for high school. So my kids actually never took an official science class, but they learned cool science principles all over the place, but they never took an official science class. But that's another option to have your children learn science, especially for your kids that are more science inclined or more engineering or STEM inclined. Outsourcing that, you can totally do that. And it's actually okay if you do that. Number 11 is board games. Yes, you did hear that right. There are some really cool board games that teach science, different science ideas. There's all sorts of really cool board games. Oftentimes, libraries will carry board games and strategy games, so you can look at your public library. But if you go online and just look up various board games about nature, they pop up, and there's so many. And it's a really fun, cool way to learn science principles. Before I share with you number 12, I want to share with you a video of my friend talking, and it's for those of you who are like, yeah, but what if your kids are naturally sciencey and inclined to science, technology, engineering, and mathematics? And this particular friend has 3 teenage boys. They are scientifically brained, mathematically brained, and yet she shares her experience both in the homeschooling world and in the public schooling world and their experiences dealing with science. So I'm just going to let her share, and then we'll talk about number 12.
Just wanted to answer the question about the science. Italo built the Tesla coil in the 4th grade. He was really into science. My kids have always been into nature or like earth sciences. I never taught them anything except for maybe the differences between rocks. Like that's it, like metamorphic, igneous, that kind of stuff. Sedimentary. Tried my best to just let them explore nature and discover it on their own. Italo was in the 4th grade when he built a Tesla coil because he got on YouTube and saw somebody in India build one, and like all the instructions were in Hindi and we had no idea what it was saying, but we could kind of tell what each thing was. So he put together a list of supplies that he wanted, and we ordered all the parts, and then he did it. He put it all himself, put together all himself. And it worked. It was a miniature version, but it lit up a light bulb from a distance. I think the distance was like up to a foot away. We were surprised at how well it worked because when we were watching the video, we're like, okay, this is totally a scam. Like we were thinking like, okay, this is just, trying to trick us into And it worked. It worked. It was really cool. And it got him super stoked and excited about science. He's never really followed another curriculum, but he's always had an interest in doing this and doing that and learning. He did read a whole book. This is all self-guided. He read a whole book on inventors since I think the 1300s, about scientists and inventors. And so he'd often come up to me, Mom, have you heard of this guy? And I'm like, actually, no, tell me about him. And I feel like learning is amplified when they have the opportunity to teach. So he would teach me, and I think it like solidified in his brain, and he, I don't know, Itzo is like super science smart. So much so that when he went to high school, he was like, this is boring. He took chemistry and physics, and the physics one kind of challenged him because there's a lot of math in there, and so he enjoyed that, I think, a little bit. Chemistry was like, biology was like super boring to him, and he found a couple worksheets that they were doing in the biology class. He found some mistakes in the worksheets, and so the teacher corrected some stuff because he was like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense, and I'm pretty sure that this was the right answer. And the teacher was like, wow, you're like the only one that's ever spoken up about it. My kids basically YouTube all their interests in science. There's so much out there on YouTube, and then we go into the physical world and experiment. When we first moved here, Enzo was in 7th grade. Enzo and Teo were in the 7th grade. And within the first 2 years of us living, he decided he wanted to build electrolysis chambers. So he used electricity with like 2 bolts and some nuts and washers along the bolts, and then he charged it with electricity. And when you charge it with electricity, it separates the hydrogen out of the water, but you have to keep it within a chamber, otherwise the hydrogen just goes into the air. And so he created an electrolysis chamber out of these bolts and washers and nuts, and you put it all in an Nalgene bottle. I think when you have an interest, you just go with it. And since then, the kids have done other things that require some scientific understanding, like welding. You have to understand metals for welding, and anyway, I feel like when they are interested, they'll pursue it. And Jada's pursued other things that the boys haven't pursued. Like, she's really into makeup right now, so she's done a little bit of experimenting, chemistry-wise, with gels and liquids and solids for her makeup-y stuff. So I think the best way to learn is where your interest lies. Because she has an interest in makeup, she's interested in more of the studies of gases and liquids and solids and all those things. Because we're just mentoring our kids through life. That's all it is. So I just need to help them, guide them to their passions, and then they will learn everything they need to know themselves. In terms of going to public school, Enzo just thought science classes were a joke. Like, he did homework for other classes in his science classes. They're such a joke because he's already there. Like, he's beyond high school science already. His mind he's already inventing things. He's innovating things in his brain. Like, really, I've never, ever used a science curriculum, like a specifically designed curriculum, and we've always modge-podged everything we've ever done for science.
And that's coming from a mother with children that are very scientifically minded and mathematically minded. Let's talk about number 12. Living life. Cooking requires science. Gardening requires science. Art requires science. My now 10-year-old daughter was really concerned because she had a friend that moved to an island near Malaysia, and she was very concerned because that island was going to be experiencing a typhoon. And so she asked me, Mom, what's the difference between a typhoon and a hurricane and a tsunami? And then we looked it up and spent time studying weather. And that stemmed out of a concern for her friend and wanting to know the difference between all three and which one was more dangerous than the other, and the likelihood of being able to survive that type of weather. That mattered to my daughter, and so we took the time to learn it. So those are the 12 things. 12 different ways that you can introduce science into your homeschool without ever having to go out and buy any particular expensive curricula. My friends, science is all around us. And with that, mamas and papas, grandmas and grandpas, you are doing so much better than you think you are. You got this. We will talk next week. If you found this video helpful and you're still in need of some ideas and tips and tricks, I'd invite you to sign up for my newsletter at school2homeschool.com.